Chapter 11. "Stay with me at all times," Mum told me as we got out of the car. It was dark and there was only one streetlight nearby. The graveyard was in the centre of Brightwood and contained rows and rows of graves. According to April, it was one of the biggest graveyards in England. Great, I thought. The vampires must really love it here. In front of us stood St. Luke's Church, with its tall towers and grimy bricks. People called it haunted, and I could see why. It was menacing in the darkness. In fact, the whole place was spooky. The church had gargoyles on each corner of the roof, and many of its windows were boarded up. Mum walked towards the graveyard, putting her finger to her lips as we passed through the rusty gates. My heart started to race. The gravestones and shadows creeped me out. I didn't like the thought that there were dead people beneath my feet. Mum stopped. Her black leather jacket shone in the pale moonlight, as did her glossy black hair, which was pulled into a tight ponytail. "I knew it," she whispered. "He's here again." "Who?" I asked. "I've been watching the graveyard ever since Helen's death. Each time I've come, I've seen the same vampire. I thought he might be here tonight, and I was right. I can smell him." "I can't smell anything," I said. She tutted. "You're a vampire hunter. Your senses are stronger than a normal human. When I was your age, I could smell a vampire from a mile away." I sniffed at the air. Nothing. "Don't worry," she said. "Your powers should appear eventually." She carried on walking. What did that mean? Was there a chance that I wouldn't get my powers? I followed her, thinking about what she'd said as I stepped between the mossy gravestones. She hadn't sounded very confident. Maybe she's right. Maybe my powers will never come. I've never beaten her in training. I have no special hunter senses. What if I'm not a hunter? I definitely don't feel like one right now. Mum didn't even seem bothered by the fact that people from our town had been killed. In fact, she strode ahead of me like she couldn't wait to find out more. All I could think about were the two old women who were dead. The further we walked, the darker the graveyard became. All the while, I tried not to think about Helen and Deirdre, or my lack of hunter talent. The tombstones were more cracked here. Some of them had completely crumbled. "Why do vampires hang around in places like this?" I asked. "The dead give them power," she replied, "and graveyards are full of the dead." She opened her mouth to say more, but then something caught her eye, and she ducked down behind a gravestone, pulling me with her. Out of the shadows walked a man. His hair was black, but the top of his head was bald. His skin was pale, but it also had red patches here and there, as if he had a rash. His clothes were dirty, and I didn't need special hunter senses to smell him. He stank of cabbage. He was nothing like the vampires I'd seen in pictures and films. He was plump, and for some reason he reminded me of a fat rat. Mum gestured for me to stay where I was. My heart thudded in my chest as she stood up and walked towards the vampire. She didn't show a hint of fear. I stayed hidden behind the gravestone. "Good evening," she said politely when the vampire saw her. "My name is Felicity." "A delicious name," he said, sniffing his crusty fingers. He had a squeaky voice to match his ratty face. "I am Rafe, just out for a walk." His face cracked into a wide smile that revealed gleaming white teeth. He looked mad. "Your teeth are almost perfect," Mum said, an edge to her voice. "I brush twice a day," he replied. They're so white they almost glow in the dark, she said. He backed away a step. I take good care of them. And what about your fangs? She threw out her arm. A stake shot out of her sleeve and soared towards him. I was sure it would hit him, but at the last moment he ducked out of the way. He stood up again, his face filled with terror and rage. Vampire hunter! Rafe shouted. Without warning, he bounded towards Mum. She leapt away, but he was fast, faster than I could have imagined. The two of them danced around each other, ducking and dodging. Mum shot towards him like a snake, and he dropped to the ground to avoid her. He kicked at her ankle, but she managed to jump out of the way just in time, and then leapt forward and pounced on him. In a blink of an eye, he was pinned underneath her. She smirked as she held the wooden stake to his chest. Rafe whimpered in fear. Tell me about the vampire clan, Mum demanded. I know there's a group of them in town. I won't tell you anything. 2 women have been killed, she shouted, and she pressed the stake harder to his chest. Talk. Okay, he said. I followed the clan to Brightwood. I wanted to join them. There are 6 of them. Some of them are old, very old. They are looking for something, a gem. What does it do? Why do they want it? I don't know, I swear. They killed 2 witches to get that gem, Mum snarled. It must do something powerful. I told you, I don't know. She sighed, then slammed him against the dirt. You had a lot of nerve coming here, she said. I don't allow vampires in my town. I've been here for weeks, he retorted angrily. You haven't kept me out. Brightwood is off limits to scum like you, she breathed. That's what you think, he said. What do you mean? Rafe chuckled madly. There's been a vampire here for years, he yelled, but then his hand flew to his mouth. What did you say? Mum asked. Nothing, he muttered. Mum pulled out a flash grenade from her jacket. Speak, or I'll set this off in front of your face. You'll be blinded for days. No, please don't, he yelped. Then tell me what you know. A powerful vampire has lived here for years, he said. The witches say he will be stronger and crueler than any other vampire in the world. And he's been here, under your nose, the whole time. They say he will lead an army. I pray to him at night. He's my lord. I'd do anything to meet him, just once. And what makes this vampire so powerful? Mum asked as if she didn't believe a word Rafe had said. I don't know, he replied. All I know for sure is that he wasn't bitten like most of us. He was born a vampire. Born a vampire? I raised my eyebrows. Mum had said there were hardly any vampires like that in the whole world. There are 2 types, she'd once told me. The born and the bitten. Nearly all the vampires you'll meet are bitten. They're strong and fast. But born vampires are stronger and faster. Even when they're young, born vampires are a threat. A shadow had passed across her face. Pray you never have to fight one. Born vampires were vampire royalty, like kings and queens. They were the original vampires, the first ones to ever walk on Earth. They could even have children together and create more born vampires. Their children grew from babies, just the same as humans, except once they were adults, they stopped aging and lived forever. Bitten vampires, on the other hand, didn't grow and they couldn't have children. They were just humans who'd been infected with vampire venom. Once they turned, they were stuck at their current age forever, even if they were only a toddler. The bitten were a weaker, less pure form of vampire, but still deadly. If there really was a born vampire living in Brightwood, we were all in danger. Mum had gone pale. "Nonsense," she said. "There's no vampire living in my town, especially not a born one. I would have known if there was. You've made it up." "He's real," Rafe spat. "I know a witch from my homeland. She told me about him." "Then what's his name?" Rafe shook his head. "If you don't tell me," Mum said in a dangerous voice, "I'll take this stake and stab it through your heart." I held tightly to the gravestone. Stab him? She can't. We never kill vampires. The rules say we must capture them and send them to Traxxas. "You're going to kill me?" Rafe said, his eyes wide. "Tell me the vampire's name." "His name is..." "Speak!" "His name is Vladimir. Vladimir Knox." My heart stopped. Vladimir. It couldn't be Dimmy, surely. He was going to be the strongest, cruelest vampire in the world. No way! Chapter 12. I could hardly believe it. Dimmy, the stammering, nervous boy with the purple lunchbox, was going to be the strongest vampire in the world. How had Rafe known? He'd said something about witches. He'd made it sound like there was some sort of prophecy about Dimmy. I tried to imagine Dimmy leading an army of vampires, dressed up as a vampire lord. I couldn't. He's always so nervous, I thought. Is it all just an act? Does he stammer and make himself look nervous to cover up his powers? I clutched the gravestone with sweaty hands. All I wanted to do was leave, but instead of letting Rafe go, Mum raised the stake above her head. She was going to stab him with it. If the wood hit his heart, it would kill him. He would turn to dust. "I've told you everything!" the ratty vampire shrieked. She wasn't listening. Without thinking, I stood up and stepped forward. "Stop!" Mum looked at me, distracted. Grabbing his chance, Rafe shoved her away. Before she could stop him, he had disappeared into the shadows. Mum turned to face me. If looks could kill, I'd be dead. She threw the stake across the graveyard and kicked the ground in anger, then turned and marched back to the car. We didn't talk as she drove us home. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as if she wanted to strangle it, her knuckles white. When we walked into the house, she slammed the door and marched upstairs. "Wait!" I called after her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to..." "You're sorry?" she interrupted. "You let a dangerous vampire escape. He could hurt innocent people." "I thought you were going to kill him." "I was," she said fiercely. "Sometimes we have to do terrible things. That's what hunters do." "I don't want to kill anyone." "Then you will never be a hunter." Her words hit me like a punch. I thought she was going to turn away, but then she spoke again. "Henrietta, I should be focused on finding the vampire clan. For all we know, the gem they were after is dangerous. But you let Rafe escape, and now I have to worry about him hurting someone." "What about Vladimir?" I said. "He's not real," she replied. "Just someone Rafe made up in his unhinged mind." She carried on upstairs. "Wait," I said. "There's something I need to tell you." She paused, her body tense. "Yes," she said. "Spit it out, Henrietta." I took a deep breath. I had to tell her about Dimmy. She thought he wasn't real. She didn't know he was in my class at school. If she knew who he was, she'd be able to capture him and send him back to Traxxas before he could hurt anyone. "It's about Vladimir," I said. She stared at me, waiting. "I think—" My voice trailed off. I knew I should tell her. She had to know the truth. But I kept seeing her with that wooden stake in her hand. She would have killed the vampire in the graveyard if I hadn't distracted her. Would she do the same to Dimmy? I wanted him to be sent away. I wanted him in prison. After all, he was a vampire who drank human blood. But I didn't want him dead. "What is it, Henrietta?" Mum asked impatiently. I opened my mouth to tell her, but I couldn't get the words to come out. They were stuck in my throat. "Henrietta!" I couldn't do it. She sighed. "If you're worried about this Vladimir Knox, then don't be," she said. "Worry about the gem and the clan of vampires instead." She continued upstairs without looking back. The moment I got into bed, I squeezed my eyes shut and tried not to think about what I'd done. I'd never kept such a big secret from Mum before. What if Dimmy hurt someone? Maybe I could capture him myself. I'd never done it before, but I was a hunter and I knew how. I'd just need a stake and a prison car from Hunter's Corp. I'd back him into a corner, blind him with a flash grenade, and then tie his hands with chains. I can't do it yet, though. I need more time to figure out a proper plan. I can't go letting off grenades at school. Dimmy wasn't the only thing on my mind either. I kept thinking about the lies I'd told April. What was she going to do when she found out the truth? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to get to sleep.